Alright, well, it's time. Welcome, everybody. This talk is about Entity Framework Code first. My name is Sergey Barskiy. What you see is the title of the application. Let's go through our sponsor slide right quick, since they made this event much cheaper than it would have been otherwise. So, a couple of words about me. I work for Manytomany Technologies, which is a Microsoft consultancy. We have offices in about 5 different cities in the U.S., including Atlanta, which is where I'm based out of. If you have any questions after the fact, shoot me an email. My email address is here. It's also on my business cards up front. Don't get in touch with me, just get one of those, shoot me an email. There is also web address to my blog, .netspeak.com. I already posted last night the slides for this presentation as well as a sample project. If you want to look at any of that, it's available for the download right now. And a couple more words. I work for Manytomany Technologies. I've been working with Entity Framework since the beta 1.0. I did 3 production projects using Entity Framework. I'm a Microsoft MVP in data platform for second year. So let's jump into the code, but before we do that, let's do a little bit of talking about theory of what Entity Framework is all about. How many people are familiar with Entity Framework? All right, that's a lot of people. That's pretty good. So I'm going to do then a quick overview for the rest of you guys. Take a couple of minutes. So Entity Framework is a Microsoft ORM tool, or Object Relational Mapping. In other words, it's a tool that exposes your database through a class structure of some sort that you can query, and all of your queries are translated to database queries. That's the gist of any ORM, really, not just Entity Framework. Right now, Entity Framework Code First is the 3rd iteration of the product. First one was 1.0 that shipped with .NET 3.5 SP1. Then version 2, called version 4, shipped with .NET 4. And 4.1 just shipped this spring, went RTM this spring. So it's a fully supported product right now. There were a couple problems with the original versions that Entity Framework Code First was supposed to address, and it did. Primarily, it was a dependence on custom base classes, even though you could get around and have some POCO classes in version 4, definitely not in version 1. And so there are some other ways, alternatives to do it, but none of them were as clean as Code First is. You don't have to create model first to have some POCO classes. That's the key difference there. So existing approaches were database first, where you point a wizard to your database, and it spits out this complicated model with all the classes that already exist that you can query against. And alternatively, you could start with a model, and so you sort of model your database, and then you push one button, and it spits out DDL that you can run into your database and create a database from that. Code First is the new approach, and it's sort of, in a way, a combination of the others. You type your POCO classes, and database could be generated off of those if you choose to do so, or you can run it against existing database. You can start with POCO classes, or again, you can pre-generate those. And I'll show you how to do both. A lot of the time, people don't start with a blank slate, so already have existing database. So there are a couple of ways you can get a head start on Code First and generate a lot of those classes up front for you. Moving right along, the big question always is why? So what is the business case for Entity Framework that we're trying to make? So one thing is what comes out of POCO classes. There is no reliance that you can put into POCO classes that will tell it that, hey, really I want to store this data in the Oracle in this state. That simply it's impossible for you to write something like that. So that's really what's called persistent ignorance. In other words, your POCO classes have no idea where they're going to be stored, nor they should. And all those smarts are pushed into the context, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Without reliance on custom classes, you have a better testability / mockability, if that's the word of your objects. It's a little easier to write unit tests without having to touch database. Whereas if you try to write a unit test against entity object, that's really, really hard, or much harder in any case. You don't have to maintain some complicated XML file. If you ever open the EDMX and you look inside on any sizable database, you're going to find a whole lot of them, tens of thousands of lines of XML in there. So which is, most people don't maintain by hand, but nonetheless, you don't have to worry about this extraneous file in your project, which is a small advantage. The number one really issue why you want to use CodeForce is conventions. And conventions is the way for you to use some assumption that framework makes for you to allow you to write less code. That's what conventions are really all about. And in Entity Framework, there is an abundance of them. If you use a reflection or object router or something like that, and you look at CodeForce, Assembly, Entity Framework, DLL, you're probably going to find about 50 different conventions covering various aspects of working with CodeForce. So if you have some spare time, look at those. It's kind of interesting reading. One thing that it does allow you to do is override those conventions. So you can inject your own, although it takes a bit of effort to do that, or you can remove existing. For example, by default, one of the conventions that's shipped with Entity Framework, and it's always created for you, is table name pluralization convention, something like that. In other words, when you create a class called person, when you run that into the database, you create a brand new database, you'll end up with a table called people. So I automatically pluralize this stuff for you. However, some DBAs really hate that with a passion. So to accommodate them, all you have to do is write one line of code, say, oh, by the way, when you're working with my database, please remove that pluralization convention first. And then do whatever it is you try. So that's one of the examples that allow you to alter quite a complicated behavior without having to write a ton of code. So framework sort of gets out of your way when you want to do that. And those are really primary reasons why CodeForce. If you want to download the tools, you can use NuGet package, or you can download it off MSDN downloads, and there is a link for you. If you download off MSDN, you'll have a couple of extra goodies that don't come with NuGet, primarily because they integrate deeply into Visual Studio. You cannot do that through NuGet. So, like, if you wanted to get a head start and you want to generate your POCO classes off the model, that functionality is not in the NuGet package, but it is in the main download. So if you want to do that, I'd recommend that you start with the main download there. And we're going to abandon the rest of the slides. You can read them at your own leisure. I don't need to stand here and just read for you, I hope. So let's go ahead and just jump into the code. And what I'm going to try to do is walk through some of the key scenarios that you will undoubtedly encounter in your working with Entity Framework, like relationship, one-to-many, many-to-many. I'm going to cover as many of those key scenarios as I can, sort of give you an idea how to do that and how you can map your POCO classes to a database. So let's go ahead and start a new project. We're going to call it EF demo console. So I'm going to start with a console application just because I don't want to deal with UI. That's not a primary aspect of this session. I want to really concentrate on Entity Framework as a technology on its own. Can everybody see this okay from the back row? Font large enough? Cool. All right, so first thing I want to do is add some references to this. Actually, let me back up. Let me separate my classes into a separate project. So I'm going to call it, create some libraries. I'm going to call it demo.data. And I'm going to create another one. I'm going to call it new project, another class library, demo.data access. What I'm trying to do is put some structure to some madness, and the only thing I have to do for my POCO classes is add a reference to data annotation. So I'm going to show you how to configure it in a number of ways. One of the easier ways, data annotations. Another thing that I have to add to work with context classes, which is a database abstraction, a couple of references to entity framework, which is 4.1, as you can tell, and the version 4.0. 4.1 builds on all existing functionality in 4.0. So you have to have those references here. And I don't think I added references to this one. It's going to be assemblies, data annotations, and entity framework as well. So now we're done with that. I'm going to add a couple of references to my console application so that I don't have to deal with that afterwards while I'm on the subject. Here we go. Now we're ready to write some classes. So let's build something simple here. I'm going to call this class attendee. So we're going to build some representation of code stuff. So we're going to have some attendee class, and we're going to put a couple of properties in there to make it obvious what we're trying to do here. I'm going to add some last name, and I'm just going to stop there. Name. Maybe one more to illustrate one more point. Date. Edit. I'll just stop right there. Now, one way to configure that is to use data annotation. So one thing that you immediately see that I'm following some naming convention. That really makes sense. I'm having what I intend to use as primary key. It's a property called attendee ID. Because I'm following existing naming conventions, I don't really have to tell entity framework what I'm trying to do here. I could if I wanted to. I could decorate this property with a key attribute. No reason for me to do that. So, as you see right immediately, I'm eliminating some code here right away, not having to specify those types of things. So now, for my string properties, I do have to specify a couple of things. For example, if I simply leave this property as last name without putting some kind of an attribute on it, what I'm going to find is that database is going to be created with the size of nvar max, which is not really what I want to do. I don't want that long of a last name. So in those cases, I have to give entity framework some specific hints. So before we go much further, let's build our database abstraction here. I'm going to call it code context. I should give it some extension. Here we go. Rename it didn't quite work. So let's go ahead and copy paste here. So what I'm prepared to do now is build my database abstraction. What I just built prior to that is my table. So our database consists of tables. So somehow I need to build something that says, all right, this is what my database looks like, and it's going to have these tables in. So in this case, I'm going to use a base class. And it's called DB context. This is a new class in Code First. If you work with 4.0 or 1.0, there was entity context. DB context is a simplified version of that, which much cleaner API, smaller API. As a result, it's easier to learn. I'm going to create a constructor right quick, and we'll come back to that in just a sec. And the next thing I want to do, I want to say, what tables do I have? So I do have a table to map to attendees. So I'm going to create a property of type dbset of attendee. Whoops. And this is how I'm going to tell entity framework what I'm trying to do here. What is it? Demo, the data, access, and I need one more using statement, which apparently I forgot to add a reference here. Go ahead and do that. Now I should be able to build and compile. So I just defined that my database has one table called attendees, and it's going to contain classes called attendee, which is just to elaborate a little bit of that, I'm just teaching entity framework what I'm trying to store and how. This is really all I'm trying to do. Now I should be able to run that in. There is one thing I'd like to do, and that is specify the connection string for this. And I'm going to just copy this right quick so I don't have to bother doing it. So there are a couple of ways you can do that. You can do something like this. What that tells it is to look in a config file, whatever application config file is, and pull that connection string and use it. In this case, I'm going to hard code it. And the reason I'm going to do that is for further demo. This is not a best practice, but there is one point I'm trying to demo, and I need that because there is a bug I'm trying to work around. So you take my word for it that you really don't want to write code like that, but I will for today. So now that I'm done with that, I can jump back to my console app. And now I can query my database. So I can say var attendees equal a couple of things I have to do. Var ctx new code context. And I have to add some references here. That's what it's complaining about. And I need a reference to entity framework. And system.data.entity. That should make it pretty happy. And I'll have to move this stuff in here. I'm going to say ctx.add10. Okay, so we got a small problem. I'll fix it right quick. What I did not do is rename this to attendees. Bad development. There we go. And then I'm going to say to list, and then I'm just going to output that console.write line attendees.count string. So I'll go ahead and run that. Let's see what happens. Hopefully it'll say I created 0 rows in here. Alright, so apparently I have a database here called that, so we're going to go ahead and kill that off from previous demo. Let's kill it. Now let's try it again. There we go. So that worked a little bit. So let's see what happened. All I did is create one class, and I'll wrap it inside my database abstraction. So what happened here, created a class with some columns matching my properties, with an automatic primary key that is going to be by default identity because I declared it as int. So that's really what just happened. So the engine interpreted my intentions and decided this is probably what I want to do. So the next concept I want to demonstrate is, go ahead.
Maybe I missed something, or maybe I'm completely not following you. Did you just do something to create that database and create that table, or
Yeah.
are they already there?
No, it's a brand new database.
When you ran your code, it created the database?
It does do that. So the question is, does this code create database if it does not exist? And then the answer is yes. It sort of helps you to get started pretty quickly and sort of model your database through your classes and just create it on the fly while you're at it. You can go the other way around, and we'll see that in just a little bit. This allows you some very rapid prototyping and very quick head start on that technology.
Currently at this stage, do you have an entity data model, or does that not exist?
So the entity data model does exist, but it does not exist as a physical file. So it's hidden from me, and the question is that where is data entity model? So it's still there because CodeForce builds on top of Entity Framework 4.0, and it builds that model dynamically on the fly, on demand. It's still there because that's what the DB context is using under the covers. And if you really want to, you can get to it and maybe even write it out to a DMX file if you really want to look at it. So all that is still there, just sort of hidden from you. Idea being to expose the properties on context that you're likely to use often and hide the stuff that you're likely not going to need very often. So of the entity, of the DB context, I could do something like this. I could say I object, I'm sure, let me go to base class, it'll be a little less typing. What you will see that DB context explicitly implements this one interface, I object context adapter, so I can do something like this. I'm going to say this, I'll say dot, and here's my access to my underlying object context. If I wanted to look at it and invoke some of the older API, that's all I have to do. So I can get to existing API, and you'll see it's pretty long. But most of the time, I should not need that, but I'm sure there are some edge cases where I would want to do that. And that functionality is still there. It didn't go anywhere. So since my database was generated on the fly, one thing I was going to show you is nullable columns. So strings by default are always nullable, because that's what they are. So if I wanted last name, which right now is nullable, to be not nullable, I can do something like this. Decorated with required. And if I want date time to be nullable, all I have to do is change the type. So what happens when I try to run this, I will get an exception here in a sec. I will make sure you guys know it because you will likely encounter that pretty quickly. So what it's telling me, I put in, there's a convention again, another convention that says, create a quote-unquote version row somewhere in my database. So it always compares that version or hash with the current hash of my database, and it will throw an exception if they don't match. But they proactively are telling you you're probably doing something wrong. And to handle those cases, during development, you can create what's called an initializer. So I'll show how to do that. I'm going to add a new class. I'm going to call it just init for short. And it's going to inherit from a key class that is shipped with Entity Framework. It's called drop, recreate, database if model changes of code context. Let's see if I mistyped that. Yeah, I did. Drop, recreate, database if model changes. Maybe it's drop create. If not, I'll just copy this class from somewhere else. Ah, there we go, that was right. So it's drop create database while model changes. So what I have to do when I'm working initially, what I'm trying to do is inject this initializer into the pipeline and say, all right, anytime model changes, just drop that data and create a new one for it. That's all I'm trying to tell it to do. So to do that, I simply have to call a static method on an object called database. And let's say set initializer of code, context, new, init. Alright, so if I run this again, and I'll come back to this in just 1 second. Since my model changed, it's going to dump my database, recreate it using a new model. So if I refresh that, now this last name is not nullable and database is nullable, so it ran my change. Where that is convenient is prototype. So you can just sit there, punch out some code, create some head start on your database. Gives you very, very quick design surface to prototype your model with. And initializer is simply a helper class. So one thing that it is lacking right now is the migration model. So if you want to think about long term, you can't really draw production database because your model changes. Not really an option. So you need some story there. Right now it is not there. There is a prototype that you can look on the EF design blog and it'll tell you what their vision is. So their vision is to leverage a database project or DataDude. And how many of you use DataDude? Just one person. So DataDude, that's the original name. Now it's called Database Project. That one allows you to put a source control on top of your database. So their idea is integrate with that and allow you to do refactoring. So the way they envision it, you say, oh, my date added, I really want to rename to date created. So on the right click, you will have some context menu that says refactor, rename to blah. So that will integrate with the database project. When you generate the script, it'll update your production database just like DataDude does now. Gives you a diff script. It'll integrate with Entity Framework. So there will be something coming up. If you look at some of the TechEd demos or PDC demos, you'll see a vision of that as well, the new version of DataDude that's coming up. So you can take a look. And so it's going to be much more tightly integrated. Between DataDude and Entity Framework, they're going to sort of, Microsoft Vision, become one product, to where you sort of seamlessly work with data and your model all in the same interface, for lack of a better word. Allows you to maintain your code a little bit better. So before we go too much further, let me show you other ways to do exact same thing. So I'm going to drop the database, right click, hit delete, kill that off. I'm going to remove this thing, so really I'm going to comment that out. So as with any technology that comes out of Microsoft, you can do the exact same thing in 100 different ways. Entity Framework is no different. They're not trying to corner you, they're trying to give you some venues to do the same thing in a way that fits your application. So in my case, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do the exact same thing. So one example, we're going to configure the setNDs table using a configuration Fluent API. So if I'm going to do override on my context, one of the overrides available is on model created. And inside there you got model builder. So model builder exposes this Fluent API that allows you to do what I just did here through code. So I can say, it'll make more sense once I type it out. I'm going to say entity of type attendee, I'm going to say property is going to be, I'll just say P for short for property, P dot last name, or what's I call last name, dot required is required, and dot max has max length of 50. So you can change those as many times as you want, configuring more stuff on the property. What's hanging off of it, for example, is Unicode. So if you don't want to have an international database, set this Unicode to false, and all of a sudden you have non-Unicode database that you can create. So if it's an English-only app, you don't want extra space to be taken by your columns. So if you look at this API, there is a whole bunch of stuff hanging off of it. You can configure concurrency, you can configure column order, meaning, because right now what's going to happen, and you could see it, the columns are created in the order they are in my physical file. What if I don't like that? So there is an API here that says, has column order, so I can say, well, this one is going to be column number 1. So I can configure to that extent. I can also do has column name. This is really convenient when you're working with legacy databases. So instead of last name, my special last name. So you're working with a legacy database that's using really, really ugly naming convention. You can completely reconfigure your data access layer and say, anytime my last name changes in my object, what I really want you to do is change my special last name column in my table. So you have almost infinite amount of customization you can do through this Fluent API. All of it can be done via attributes. I didn't demonstrate those, but there is an attribute called column order, and there's an attribute called column name. They all exist. So pretty much whatever you can do with attributes, you can do with Fluent API. There are some exceptions, like whatever you can do with attributes, you can do in Fluent API, but reversal is not really true. There is some functionality that is lacking. If you still want to use attributes, you have to write a little bit of code. If you really want to do that, I have 2 or 3 blog posts on how to do that. Just go to my blog and you can just copy paste that code if you really want to do that. It allows you to create custom attributes that will automatically inject this type of code in for you. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is ability to create, configure your database through Fluent API. And if I'm going to look to see what got created this time, hopefully I didn't mess up too many things. And my attendees table still has 50 characters, non-nullable column. Question?
I noticed you're deleting the database, and if you had multiple tables, you're only modifying the POCO class for the table. Could you just delete the table?
All right, now, no.
No, you have to delete the entire table.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you could dump that table. I'm not sure how much that's gonna buy you in long term. You can dump one table. The problem is your hash isn't gonna match any longer. So I don't know what it's gonna do. Chances are I'll probably still dump the whole database for you and recreate. Is what it's gonna do. If you can't, because there is no migrate database if model change is initialized. So toss another idea out there. That is not to say you can't write your own. So if you buy something like Redgate, they have what's called SQL Compare, and it comes with an SDK that allows you to do database migrations. So if you want to spend, I would guess in about 3 days you can write your own modified database when model changes initialize. I want to say if you buy some like a powerful tool like that, you can write your own about 3 days, I would say, and test it and have it work. But Microsoft doesn't have that gap filled right this second. That's what I'm saying. You can use the SDK that comes with API and programmatically do that. So that there is always a way to get something done if you really want to do that, and that's your goal. For rapid prototype, it's not worth the effort. Once you roll into production, I would say that's definitely worth the effort at that point. So say you're prototyping. Well, let's do one more way to configure the same thing, because there has to be another way. So what I'm going to do is add another class. Add new class. I'm going to call it attendee config. One thing I'm going to say is why I'm doing that. So this looks pretty good, right? It's not terrible. Imagine you have 200 tables with 20 columns in each one. This on-model creating method isn't going to be something you'll be able to maintain. It's going to become unwieldy pretty soon. So there is a way for us to create some configuration classes on core type basis. And I honestly don't remember the class name for that one, so I'm going to just steal it. Hopefully it's still here. Or not. So I'm gonna have to figure it out. So I think it's called entity type configuration for attendee. And see if that's gonna be happy. Yeah, that was it. And the only thing I need here is override a constructor. And inside my constructor, I'm gonna say just this. Let's see if that builds. So the code is identical, but now I have an ability to split this on-model creating into one class or type. So it's exact same thing. And how do I add that here? I'm going to say model builder dot configurations dot add new attendee config. So if I didn't mess anything up, we should compile. We did, so I'm going to drop the database one more time and make sure that the only thing I configured here was last name, make it non-nullable, and set a max length on it, run that in. And then take a look to see what happened. The same thing. So there's three distinct ways you can configure it. So why would you want to use one versus the other? So some people like to keep their POCO classes as POCO-ish as humanly possible. So they would think that attributes are really not POCO. They become something more. So for those people, you can say, well, you can default and configure them by hand and keep your classes as pristine as humanly possible. For other people, they say, well, attributes are really convenient and I type a lot less, and I like that. Not only that, but other UI frameworks like MVC or RIA services, they actually are aware of these data annotations. So you get free validation. If you try to consume the same POCO classes from either one of those two technologies, you'll get free validation just because you define those properties as part of your database definition. So there is some code reuse. So the real answer is depends which one you want to use. As always, that's the answer. I wish I had a better prescription, a better answer for you, but that's truly is the answer. So now we got done with that. I'm gonna go ahead and take all this stuff out and switch back to my attribute-based stuff for a minute. And next thing I'm gonna roll into is some foreign keys and some associations. So say attendee comes from certain city, so I'm gonna add a class called location. And I'm going to make it public again. And we're going to add some couple of properties. Not going to go crazy here. Same thing really. String, location name. I'm going to add string length here. I'm going to add 20. Doesn't really matter. So it's really irrelevant what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to demonstrate, though, is how do I say that each one of my attendees has a location. So how do I teach entity framework what I'm trying to do here? And so the answer is very simple, it's just another property. So I can say location. That's all I really gotta do. Of course, once it comes down to API, anytime I add an attendee, I want to change location, I have to create an instance of location class. And so that would be kind of annoying. So to avoid that problem, I'm also going to get location ID, decorate this with a foreign key, and paste this in. So what I just created here, I'm teaching entity framework saying, location and attendee has one-to-many relationship. Also, whenever I'm setting location ID and attendee, I'm really establishing that relationship via just an ID, not via the entire location class. Does it make sense? I still have my initializer, so I'm going to run this in, see what's going to happen. Hopefully something good. And I refresh the tables. Now I have locations, but that was pretty obvious. But if I'm going to look at the columns, I have a foreign key column to my location table. So all of a sudden that worked.
Which one of those is the governing location for that attendee? If you fetch back an attendee, and if I assign his location ID as a numeric value, but also is the location object a read only, or can it be set also?
It's a location object is a first class property.
Okay, so
you
if
can
I
set
a location ID and I assigned a different location object such that they were kind of in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
And then you save that entity back.
Okay.
Which one is going to prevail as?
Well, we'd have to test that. I really don't have that answer.
That's why you might think the object is maybe read-only. So don't mess with the object, just mess with the ID.
But you might want to legitimately do that. Yeah. You might legitimately want to set a location via object.
Yeah, the issue is which one is the governing control of where it's located.
I suspect the object is going to be it, but there is no way to have that answer without knowing. So we'll have to run that. So we have a few minutes at the end. We'll test that theory. So now we're done with that. Let's do many-to-many relationships. So this was fairly easy so far. So let's do many-to-many. So we're going to add another class, and we're going to call it a session. And again, we're just going to add a couple of properties here. Nothing really that much. We just need a name and ID. And put string lengths in here. And go string length 20. So now we have a session. Now how do I establish a many-to-many relationship between sessions and attendees? That's what I'm trying to do. As you would imagine, it's just properties. So in here I'm going to say iCollection of attendee. I'm going to call it attendees. That looks good. Now I'm going to flip to attendee. I'm going to do a reverse. iCollection of sessions. That's really what I'll do. So now, that means many-to-many, meaning that attendee can attend multiple sessions, and one session can be attended by multiple attendees. And that's all I really have to do to establish a many-to-many relationship in here. So if I'm going to run that, and I'm going to see what happens. So database was dropped for sure, because it did change. And now I have a session attendee. So it builds junction table for me automatically. Really, as a developer, I never care about this junction table. It makes no relevance to me. It's just a code I have to write if I'm using store procedures. In case of NT-framework code force, you don't have to, all you have to do is add attendee object to a session, or conversely, add a session object to attendee. It'll automatically establish this many-to-many relationship and shove a row into my session attendee table for me automatically. Make sense? So now let's put some data in here and see how we can manipulate some data. So I'm going to just, instead of actually browsing it, I'm going to show another trick here. And I'm going to change something. I'm going to add another property to force initializer to run again. I'm going to call first name, and I'm just going to copy this stuff in here. Now, initializer has this nifty functionality that helps you do some prototyping. So it also has an override, seed, an interesting method. So in here I can just say, oh, forgot to do one thing. One thing I forgot to do is put my other two tables in here. So I'm going to have session, sessions, and what was the other one? I don't remember. Location. Here we go. Thanks. Location. Location. Locations. So do that. That can flip. Copy and paste from. Okay. Let's control Z out of here. Let's see where we end up. Location. Location. Locations. Let's see if we got anyone. That looks good. So we can actually, now that this doesn't do anything productive, we can take it out and see a little bit better. Sure, should have switched to a higher font for people in the back there. So here's what we've got. Now, flipping back to my init method, what allows me to do is shove some test data into my database. So how do I do that? I can say context dot locations dot add new location, and I'm just gonna give it a name. Location name equal Knoxville, Tennessee. There we go. I can do the same thing with sessions. So I can say context.sessions.add new session. Same essentially thing. When I add a couple, I'm gonna say session name equal EF.
Turn back the object so you can set up relationships. Is there a way to get the object back, like from the Knoxville object?
Yeah, you can do that. So all what you would need to do is do something like this. Extract that out, say this is going to be, what is it, session equal this. Now you retain a handle onto the session. So now you can add some attendees to that session at that point. And when you're all done, you have to save it. That's the first mistake I always made. I forget to fire save changes and then wonder why init doesn't work. So I run that in. And so what that allows you to do is when you drop database, put some test data into it. Not a good sign. Well, that's alright. We'll restart. We'll move on. So we take a look at this. It added my location, and I assume it added a session as well. Come on. Well, that totally blew up. So let's, while it's restarting, I'm gonna just do a new instance of Studio. Hopefully this will work a little better. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to manipulate the data through that API. So that's the important part. When all said and done, all we're trying to do is save some data. That's really the only reason why we messing with all that.
Do those attributes, do they have an overload so you can specify if it's a indoor car or a car car or anything like that?
That one, there is no attribute for that, unfortunately. So that one, you either have to write your own custom attribute, and like I say, you can read my blog and it'll tell you how to do that, or you can use the Fluent API to do the same. But there is no Unicode attribute right now that's shipped.
The default is Unicode?
The default is Unicode, yes. So, but you can write what's hook into the Fluent API, because Fluent API is still there. So you can write some attribute, parse them out manually, and say, oh, if this class is decorated with this Unicode attribute, I'm going to use the exact same Fluent API to set that property manually. So it requires you to use a lot of reflection, unfortunately, and expression tree manipulation, but you can do it. And like I said, if you want to use that code, more power to you. It's not that hard. So now I'm really tired of waiting. So Control-Alt-Delete is the answer to all world's problems. So let's see if we can find that one. Hard to say. I'm just going to kill them all. That always works. Not really sure. Oh, okay, I think they're all dead. No, there's one more. Well, I think that's, yeah. This I think is the new one. Ah, here we go. So my project is still there. Luckily it didn't kill that. And then I'm going to clean the solution and hopefully it'll stop crashing on me. And clean, rebuild, hope for the best. So here we go. Coming back to my project, let's see if we can manipulate some data in here. So we already saw how to create new attendee. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to say context. Actually, I'm going to do it like this. Var attendee is equal new attendee. Attendee. Luckily, it doesn't have too many properties. I'm not remember adding that many. Alright, well, go ahead and add that. Only have to do it once. Not that big a deal. First name is going to be F. Last name is going to be L. We're going to do it pretty quickly. And we're going to leave that for now. A location I think is required. But I'm going to set location ID to 1. Do it like that. So now I can create new attendee. Then all I have to do is add it to the context. .add attendee and then ctx.save changes. So now this should create new attendee. So we're gonna put a breakpoint here for a sec. Show you what happened. There is an interesting concept that comes up here. So if I look at attendee, it's a brand new record. What you're gonna note is the primary key already got populated. So if it automatically retrieves for me, automatically populate, and I have to do some weird stuff. So it returns that primary key to me, and then I can do updates. So see, location and session, they both null. They were never set. So let's do something different here. Let's retrieve that. I'm gonna comment this out for a sec, and instead, what I'm going to do is retrieve the data, because that's also another interesting concept. How do we retrieve the data? So to retrieve, we're going to say var first attendee equal to ctx, attendees first, and I can put some where clause in here. I'm not going to bother. So now that I got it, I can modify. So I can say first name is equal to update. And then I can do ctx.savechange. So I want to fire that one through. I already added one. So hopefully after I run, I should have an attendee row here that has a name of update. So that's how it works. So now this was pretty easy because I maintain a handle to my object. So if you think about web environment, that's never the case. First you retrieve it, user modifies some data, they submit the stuff, I reconstruct that attendee object from thin air. Now I want to fire an update. So there is that disconnect where my code like this will not work. There's nothing I can do to make it work. So now that I know that there is that ID with ID of 1, my web app will have that information. And I'll read, and I'll send it back to me. So what I'm going to do is uncomment this for a sec. Take that out. Uncomment this. And I'm going to do something interesting. This is how you should be doing updates. I'm still creating new attendee, except now I'm going to say, I know what attendee ID is. It's 1. So during my post back from my web app, all I'm doing is just create a new record. So now there comes the interesting part. I can say ctx.attendees.attach attendee. If I do add, it'll create a new row. So attach tells that this is an existing row. Don't worry about how it got into your context. All you need to know, there is an existing row. And after that, I can say ctx.entry, and this is going to be my attendee.state equal to modify. So now I attached it. As far as it knows, it has never been touched. I have to tell, well, somebody touched it. My web app touched it. So I'm going to say attendee with 1. I'm going to say first. And we're going to say last. Run that in. If we did everything right, I'm going to select that. So here's one problem. It says, oh, I already have attendee with that primary key in my context. How did it get here? Here's my select statement. So this is how my attendee got into my context. So if you think of a context, this is your database abstraction. But when you're working locally, this is your in-memory database abstraction. So if I already retrieved that attendee, already has it, I can't attach new one. It's going to collide on primary key. It's going to say, you can't have 2 attendees with 2 primary key on 1. So it's telling me I'm making a mistake here. In ordinarily web app, you'll never encounter that. But if you do, there is one way to get around it. You can say, use a concept or extension method called local. So if I'm going to do attendees, I have an extension method called local. So what local is, it says only give me my attendees that are currently in memory. Don't ever round trip to database. Not interested in that. I'm interested in what you have in memory. So I can test. So if I have during my updates, I'm calling 4 different objects to do various types of updates. So one of them can shove an attendee into my memory. Then the next one comes in, oh, by the way, I want to update an attendee with ID of 1. So if you want to be on the safe side and you encounter that, test your local for presence of attendee with ID of 1. So local is just another enumerable, so you can say first or default 1.attendee ID equal 1. var exists. You can do something like this, and you can say, well, if you have 1, I'm going to update that one. But if I don't have 1, I'm going to attach a new one. So we can do it either way. So I'm going to comment this code out for a second, run it to make sure no errors are thrown. Okay, so that works. So let's see if we got add attendee with first name, last name. So that works. So that's update. Now how about delete? So if you ever use ASP.MVC default scaffolding, what you're gonna find that delete code, and for delete, I'm gonna comment this stuff out for a sec. Delete code typically looks like that. I have a lot of commented out code. It'll look like this. It's gonna say var attendees attendee is equal to ctx dot attendees dot find 1. And then it's gonna say ctx dot attendees dot delete dot remove attendee, and then save changes. Let me show you what actually happens here. Pull up where is IntelliTrace here? Don't see IntelliTrace. Debug, Windows, other. Oh, here's IntelliTrace. I'll just run, see if it'll pop up. Here it is. So see what happens when I fire this code. It says it just checks to see if database is there. And then it says, oh, by the way, I'm going to select every column from my attendee table. It looks a little weird, it just does define. But it fires this very complex query, then it serializes the result, and returns it back to me. So why do I want to do that? All I'm trying to do is fire a query that says, delete from attendees where ID equal 1. But so if you write a code like this, even though it will work, but it's never something that you want to do. You incur just totally unnecessary overhead. So instead of doing that, I'm going to do this. Uncomment this. But in this case, I don't really care about anything besides ID. So I'm creating a new ID. Then I'm going to say ctx.attendees dot attach attendee, and then I can do this. Alternatively, I can do the same thing that I showed you now, ctx dot entry attendee dot state equal delete. So it's really the exact same thing. There's always 20 different ways to do the same thing. So just for giggles, I'm going to leave that one in here. So if we did everything right, that should wipe my row from here. And it did. So now let's do something different. So I'm going to add that code back. That's an interesting question. You do, and there is an overload on context. Let's see, CTX, if I remember right. There is execute here. It may be on the database context actually. So I have to expose my entity context, just like I showed before, and that one has execute store query method, and you give it the type, so it's a generic type, and you say, oh, by the way, serialize results into this class. So you can work with store procedures because there is really no way around it, but you don't have, and not unusual, you don't have a way to design something like this. You simply have to create a class to match your store procedure. And you can just do execute store query that simply updates something the exact same way. So you can sort of pass it a class, it will parse it out and execute it. And so let's see, I'm going to add this attendee back. And where is it? Here, I think. There, yeah. What I'm gonna do here, just to save some time, because we're running really low on time, I'm just going to browse some data in L1111, and then I'm going to, I think I have locations. I think I still do. Yeah. So do I have sessions? I still do. So I can add a row here. Attendee ID is 1. This is kind of interesting. So session 1 attendee is 2. Yeah. So now I have that. So now I'm trying to retrieve it. So I'm gonna take all this stuff out, because there's an important concept I'm trying to show you for dot first. So I'm gonna stop here. I should stop here. The bell's gonna die on there, yeah. Yep. That's about time. It's been like at least 10 minutes. Something really unstabilized this thing. So, what I'm trying to talk about is lazy loading. So I have property on attendee called sessions. Because the property is not virtual, actually it does not participate in lazy loading. Meaning anytime I retrieve attendee, I have to explicitly tell it either include the sessions or not include the sessions. And if I don't, it's never going to be populated. So if all I have to do is make that property virtual, and then it'll participate in lazy loading, meaning as soon as I touch the property, it'll fire a query to retrieve the data. So to do that, all I have to do is mark that property as virtual. So we got 3 minutes. I'm going to pull up hopefully an existing studio version and show you how to do that. That was really the last thing I was trying to show you. Lazy loading is very, very important concept, but it also can get you in trouble. For example, you're retrieving a list of 200 attendees for some random list, and you touch in that sessions property. What's going to happen is you're going to fire 201 query against your database just to get that list out. That's not going to perform well. Alternatively, what you can say is explicitly tell it, and you can do it via select. So you can say attendees.include, and you can say always include my sessions. And so that way it'll fire one query. It's going to be complex query, but only going to be one query to retrieve the list. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. Lazy loading is very powerful. It can get you in trouble. So you have to always look at what you're trying to do, evaluate that, and say, do I want to use lazy loading or not? Whether you want to use it or not, you have to probably declare property as virtual, so when you need that functionality, you'll have it. So all of your I collection of T, all those properties should be declared as virtual. A couple of last things I want to show you. The deal with performance. Where is my context? So there is something that's available via Microsoft Code. It's called Entity Framework Power Tools. And there is a link, I think, that I included. And it has this magic feature here. If I right-click on object context, this magical menu shows up. Optimize entity data model. So Entity Framework has the concept of what they call views. And views are the queries that map to your database. And if you pre-compile them, your code, your initialization of your context becomes much faster. An example would be if you have a context with maybe 200 tables, a complex structure, what you will find, first time you touch the context, it may take up to a minute for it to become usable. And that's a long time for a user to wait. Your web request may time out. You could have all kinds of problems. Your update may time out. So to get around it, if you pre-compile those views, it'll cut that time down significantly.
When it's like compiling those, is it caching them with SQL? Like the same way if I ran a link query and keep running the same link query, it'll be cached inside of SQL.
SQL will cache it, but on top of that, it compiles the expression tree. So it builds the expression tree and compiles it. So the expression tree parsing is usually a time-consuming venture. So those compile queries typically execute faster because they cut down on expression tree parsing. The caching in SQL Server is going to happen no matter what. It's going to be smart enough to cache your query plans just like any other query. Question?
Which version of the Entity Framework has that pre-compiling capability or context?
I think they all do. Just for other ones, you have to download this T4 template, and you have to hunt Microsoft downloads for it, but there is a T4 template. You download, you include that, and you have to modify something, I don't remember what, but you can pre-compile your views in any version. You just have to jump through some hoops versus right-click and then say optimize. That's kind of neat. Another feature that you have in that Power tool is let's see, cloud context, entity framework. Let's see. There was a menu here. Oh, there it is. Reverse engineer code first. Quite obscure feature, but it can give you a head start on your existing database. So you point to the database, and it'll spit out your POCO classes for the entire database. So that'll give you a huge head start on your existing database. You don't want to sit there and retype everything. That's kind of time consuming. So some of those things, optimization and view generation, they can cut down on effort, but also improve the performance. The other thing that where context is initiated, it caches everything in static variables, meaning that it'll execute much faster. But in web environments, you have to be aware of it because static variables will go down when the app pool does. So default app pool in IIS is 20 minutes lifecycle. So what you're going to notice on a large model, every 20 minutes your web app is going to hiccup a little. It's going to take a little pause. Think about it. It's likely it's your context being instantiated for the first time. So if you manipulate that app pool lifecycle time, you can also improve the performance of that. So increase it to maybe 24 hours or something where it recycles during off-business hours, something like that. You can time it that way. That way you don't take that overhead of every 20 minutes your app slowing down. So performance is a really important part of it. There is a good blog that Anti-Framework guys wrote on Anti-Framework performance. It deals with some of these things, also deals with compiled queries. So if you have repetitive queries like you always find in attd by ID 200 times every minute, you might want to pre-compile that query.
Do they have an attribute to specify like indexes?
No. Indexes has to be handled separately. It does not handle indexes. That's where your database maintenance rules, they still apply. Even though we use code first, you still have to maintain your database. You still have to tune it. None of that is going to happen for you automatically. So for rapid prototyping, this is good, but when you're ready, you really need to put your database under source control and maintain it from that end and simply keep your POCO classes in sync. You can only survive for so long with continuously dropping and recreating database. That's initial phase of the project, not your main phase. It'll become unmanageable at that point. So you can use DataDude, you can use Redgate source control, you pick your tool and go with it. You have to take care of your database, your indexes, your tuning. None of that is going away just because we use Entity Framework. And I think we're completely out of time. So I appreciate everybody's time. Have any questions? Shoot me an email. Here's some swag.